I'm Ron Drotos from keyboardimprov.com, and thanks for being here for my 56th video in the Journey Through the Real Book. 6th edition, Captain Marvel by Chick Corea is the 56th tune. And the great thing about this is that you never know what you're going to get. They're in alphabetical order. So you're going from swing era to semi-rock music to Latin music, from Cole Porter to Chick Corea, Sonny Rollins to Keith Jarrett, to Irving Berlin. You don't know what you're going to get next if you just go in order, and that's wonderful because it lets us sort of delve into this, delve into that, and then tie these things together stylistically so we understand where this comes from and where it's going from by making these connections, even in a what seems like a random way, but we can use it to understand, because if you're just going chronologically, you might spend 2 decades on the music of the 20s, right? And then you never get to the 70s. So here we're in the 70s, and we're going to connect it with the music of older jazz. And basically, Stan Getz, the tenor saxophonist, put together a band in the early 70s of what you might call young lions, young up-and-coming musicians who are really hungry to play with a lot of energy and make a name for themselves. And Chick Corea was one of them. Chick had played with Miles Davis, and he was known in the jazz world. He wasn't quite the superstar he eventually became with Return to Forever and then all his other solo projects and projects as leaders. So he was very much a sideman in the group, but he was also known. And Stan Getz had played straight ahead jazz in the 50s and 60s, and then some of his music was more in the Latin realm, and he had huge hits in the bossa nova craze of the late 50s, early 60s with The Girl from Ipanema, and just playing these beautiful melodic lines over this Latin beat. Chick Corea, a decade later, really got into Latin music too. As a teenager, he played in the Latin bands in Boston, where he grew up, and then he brought this to his solo work. And I think one of the reasons that they did this is because Latin music has straight eighth notes. And starting in the late 50s, popular music gravitated away from swing eighth notes of the 30s and 40s, the swing era, and 20s, and became straight eighths of rock and roll, basically straight eighths, which it still is today for the most part. So bossa nova had that in common with rock, right? So there was a sort of a crossover in terms of the marketplace. Same thing happened in the early 70s with jazz fusion, and even today with smooth jazz and funk and stuff like that. You can get jazz musicians that are playing Latin music or Latin sort of influenced music to sort of appeal to a crowd that wouldn't necessarily enjoy the the swing eighth music on its own. Maybe because they haven't heard it too much, right? And you can do it without compromising your music, as they did here. So again, older musician Stan Getz, younger musician Chick Corea, they find this Latin music in common, and they're going to go for it. It's a great tune, and it actually has a little bit of rock in the chord progression, because on the second page, Chick abandons the 7th chords of jazz harmonies and just goes pure rock. You could play that as, Cream, or Eric Clapton could do something like. It's pure rock and roll, and he's doing it with his Latin feel. But you can hear that it still has that energy of the time. The jam bands, you call them, of the late 60s, where you go on extended solos using this chord sequence. It's a minor chord, it goes down through the flat 7, flat 6, and then back up. You hear it all the time in classic rock and roll. So here we go. And if I had any advice that I'd give you for playing sambas, it's don't start necessarily by just trying to play a million notes. Let that come naturally. Get into these rhythms. And simple melodic phrases. Maybe the other stuff will start flowing, but generally you can't go wrong with simple Latin rhythms, right? Get into those Latin rhythms and these melodies, these legato melodies. So here we go. lots of fun. You surprise yourself sometimes. You don't really know where you're going, playing these downward licks or something. I never really played those before, but they just seem to come out of what came before. So that's what improvisation really is. Improv is a blending of taking things you know how to play and using them in a fresh way, and maybe playing things you've never played before, discovering it in the process. Thanks for being here. Check me out at keyboardimprov.com if you want step-by-step lessons, personal feedback. I teach on Skype. Anything you need to help you with your piano playing, I can give you. And thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next video, which will be, as I said before, total surprise, Lee Morgan's Ciora, which Herbie Hancock played on the original. So looking forward to that. See you then.